Chapter 6, Part 1 of The Seven Stairs by Stuart Brent. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6, Part 1 The Man with the Golden Couch. I am a great believer in the theory of attractiveness. This theory is a way of describing a commonly experienced relationship between external events and what you feel in your heart. Something inside tells you that you are ready, and then out of the world of events, happenings begin to occur which seem exclusively yours. The conditions were there all the time, but your heart wasn't ready to accept them. Hence, the attractiveness in the world did not reveal itself. But when your heart is ready, whatever it is ready for will be fulfilled. Perhaps the first step in this fulfillment was my marriage to Jenny, a girl with a strong, fine face and a long brow, a generous soul, and a brilliant talent. In spite of the growing fame of the Seven Stairs, we faced a hard struggle for existence. New people were coming to buy books, mink coats mingling with hand-me-downs, but I made only grudging concessions to what many of them wished to buy. I refused to carry how-to-do-it books, occult books, books written and published by charlatans, books pandering to junk eaters. I wouldn't even special order junk. While I was limiting my practice to the least profitable aspects of the book business, Jenny's personal income as a staff pianist at a television station was cut off completely when the management eliminated most of the musicians from the payroll. So she came to help at the Seven Stairs. Late one evening, when I was alone in the store, an unlikely customer came in, walking with a slightly swaying motion and conveying a general attitude of, "You can't help me. I'm on an inspection tour. Stay away." An effort to engage him in conversation met with stiff resistance, so I retreated unhappily behind my desk. Finally, my man came over to the desk with a small volume of Rilke's poetry and asked whether I carried charge accounts. When he saw me hesitate, he dipped into his pocket and paid in cash, stripping the single-dollar bills from a sizable bankroll, a demonstration which added further to my resentment of Ira Blitzton. With the exception of Ben Cartman, no one played a more decisive part in shaping the future of my business than Ira. In spite of the initial impression he made on me, and my obvious reaction, he continued to come into the store, and we became friends. He was an amazing reader, with an excellent library of books and recordings, and he had an uncle, he told me, who was a lover of opera and might be persuaded to buy books and records from me. One morning I received a phone call from the uncle, Dr. Lionel Blitzton, who asked if I had a recording of the Verdi Requiem with Pinza. It was a rich, full, commanding voice, and I was glad to be able to reply that I did. He suggested that I bring it over immediately. Fortunately, he lived not far from the shop, but in a world of opulence such as I had never encountered. On arrival, I was sent by the maid to wait upstairs in the master bedroom. The room was fitted out like an 18th-century drawing-room. One wall was entirely covered with books. Later I discovered that because of illness he did most of his entertaining there. I waited nervously, and noticing money lying on top of the dresser, retreated across the thick Turkish rug to the threshold and stayed there. He came up the stairs quickly, a man in a hurry, I thought. But I was unprepared for his appearance. A kind of giant panda, very short and bald, with perhaps a few gray hairs straying about the temples, and wearing awesomely thick glasses. He had been going blind for years. His breathing was difficult. His lungs had a way of constantly filling up from his exertions, and I was later informed that his heart too was giving out. Platoons of doctors had struggled to keep him alive over the years. What was really arresting and somewhat terrifying about this fat, puffing little man was the face. Above the glasses, the skull seemed all forehead. Beneath, the clean-shaven skin was baby pink, and the mouth shaped like a rosebud and just as red. That was it, the mouth. And when he spoke, the voice was musical, no longer deep, but rather high in pitch. Our initial transaction was completed in a moment. The doctor looked at the records, asked the price, made his way to the dresser, gave me 2 $10 bills, thanked me, and vanished as quickly as he had appeared. I walked down the stairs and left quietly, but my heart was pounding. It was several weeks before Dr. Blitzton called again, very late in the evening. I recognized the sing-song quality characteristic of his speech as he asked for several books. I had all of them except the one he particularly wanted. He said he needed it to refresh himself with a certain passage. "Well, never mind," he said. "I'll get the book elsewhere tomorrow. Would you mind awfully delivering the others tonight?" Again the maid let me in and sent me to the bedroom. I waited in the doorway until the doctor motioned me in and asked me to deposit the books on a small table beside the bed. He was sitting up in bed, supported by a backrest, a blinking Buddha in white, blue-trimmed pajamas, and covered with a thin, fine blanket. As I started to introduce myself, he waved his hand and began to talk. So far as I knew, I had never before met a psychoanalyst, and I had the feeling that my every word and move would be subject to his scrutiny and probably found wanting. As I answered his questions carefully, politely, haltingly, I became increasingly jumpy and nervous. My words wouldn't come together as they usually did. I found myself making the most ridiculous errors, catching myself up only to discover that I was blushing. I was in the wrong place, and I wanted to go home. Somehow he was able eventually to put me at ease, and I merely sat and listened. Even when he voiced opinions on Shakespeare which I felt certain were dead wrong, I said nothing. What was important was the stream of his language, which was rapid, endless, scintillating, inexhaustibly alive. His charm and wit, his knowledge of literature, and his Voltairean cynicism thrilled me, while his pinpoint knowledge of Hebrew and Yiddish left me helpless. Finally, I was dismissed. He thanked me again for having gone out of my way to deliver the books, and told me to special order the particular volume he needed, a technical work of which I had never heard. He had decided to wait for it. The following morning I opened an account for Dr. Blitzton, and I called Ira to thank him for this introduction to his remarkable uncle. I felt that something rather peculiar was happening, but I had no idea that it was to open up an entirely new phase in my business and in my personal experience. The departure which was to make the difference between my financial success or failure in the book business was inaugurated upon my third visit to Dr. Blitston's residence. This time I was received in the downstairs study, where the doctor sat behind a tremendous, brilliantly polished desk. He offered me a drink, which I declined, for I was still very shy in his presence. Then he launched quickly into the plan he had formulated. "I understand," he said, "that you have recently married. I understand that you have a struggling business. I should like to offer a suggestion. Psychoanalysts have to get most of their books directly from the publishers or from dealers in England. Why don't you put in a good stock of such books? There will be immediate demand when I tell my colleagues of it. And I will do one more thing also. I'll help you buy the right titles. Take these 5 books and compile the bibliographies from them. Then come and see me Sunday afternoon, and I'll help you make your selection." I accepted a drink now, amazed by this sudden generous offer and the possibilities it opened to me. All I could do was to sit and look, with a heart too flooded with emotion for speech. I found words finally which must have been the proper words, for he smiled gently as he saw me to the door. "Sunday afternoon, then. Good night," he called. On Sunday morning the phone rang. It was Dr. Blitston telling me that I should bring Jenny too. On arrival, we were escorted into the living room. Again I felt in the presence of a world of unbelievable grace and charm. The long, elegantly proportioned room had a vaulted ceiling and walls covered with early Chinese paintings. At the far corner stood 2 ebony Steinways, back to back. Dr. Blitston was seated near one of the pianos, sipping a glass of wine. Ira was also there, along with Dr. Harvey Lewis, who soon became a 7 Stairs regular. After the introductions, Dr. Blitston asked Jenny to play for us. I felt terribly responsible. She had scarcely touched a piano for months, and I knew her extreme sensitivity as a performing artist. But she went to the piano without a word of apology and began playing Scarlatti, then an impassioned Shostakovich prelude, and finally The Girl with the Flaxen Hair. There was no doubt that she was accepted, and I along with her. I went home with my book lists, and the following morning was busy writing letters, opening accounts, and beginning the formation of one of the finest libraries of psychiatric books ever gathered in a single bookstore. With Lionel Blitston's help, I prepared the first psychiatric book catalog to come out of Chicago, and mailed it to every psychiatrist in the United States, to every university library and institute for psychoanalysis, and to selected prospects in Canada, Brazil, Germany, even Africa. Because of Dr. Blitston's extraordinary editing, the catalog featured books not readily obtained in America. I became an active importer of English titles, especially from the Hogarth Press, which had an outstanding listing of psychoanalytic books. A few months later, I added a supplement to the original catalog, including books on psychology, philosophy, anthropology, art, and literature. I had quickly discovered that psychoanalysts were deeply interested in the impact of all areas of thought upon man's inner experience and his spiritual life. Soon 90% of my business was coming from my new specialty, which continued to thrive in spite of growing competition from New York involving price cutting, which the publishers appeared powerless to prevent. The local psychoanalysts were my best accounts, and many of them, including Bob Corman, Harvey Lewis, Fred Robbins, Richard Renneker, Aaron Hilkovich, Jack Sparer, Joel Handler, Stan Gamm, Ernest Rappaport, and Robert Groner, along with Katie Dobson, the obstetrician, and Harold Laufman, the surgeon, became torchbearers for the Seven Stairs and lasting friends. Even less expected than this boom in my business was the social consequence of my deepening relationship with Lionel Blitzton. The last thing I would ever have conceived, the last for which I would have hoped, as a consequence of my career as a personal bookseller, was an induction into the Proustian world of the coterie. The machinery of a coterie is simple. The reasons behind its operation and its subtle influence on the lives of those drawn into its orbit are complex almost beyond endurance. Essentially, the coterie consists of a number of people who hold similar views on unimportant things. Everyone admitted must observe a cardinal prohibition, to say nothing fundamental about anything. All must follow the leader, employ a common stock of expressions, adopt the same mannerisms, profess the same prejudices, affect the same bearing, and recognize a common bond of impenetrable superficiality. It was all to be seen from the first, although I would not permit my heart to acknowledge it. We were there for the entertainment of a sick, lonely, gifted man. Sitting up in his huge bed, Lionel held forth on every subject imaginable that related to human creativity. He talked brilliantly, fluidly, endlessly, while his auditors listened, sipped tea or coffee or liqueur, bit into a cracker or sandwich, laughed or smiled when signaled to do so, or scowled when necessary. The strange thing was that so many were envious and wanted desperately to belong. But the number had to be limited. Lionel did the choosing, and he did the eliminating. Eventually, in fact, he discarded all but one. He used people as a machine uses oil. When a person ceased to give what he needed, or showed signs of drying up, the search began for his replacement. For Lionel required constant stimulation to avoid falling into melancholy. The dinner parties and soirees to which he was addicted were at once indispensable and boring to him, tonic and yet destructive. The web of his character and his professional and social commitments was so complex that it became virtually impossible for him to find a situation of free and natural rapport, or one with which he could deal in any way except capriciously. Hence his total need for the faithful. Hence, too, if one of the faithful became valueless, out he went. Then began the cries and recriminations, and the storm of hysteria reigned supreme in the teacup. End of Chapter 6, Part 1.
Please subscribe to update new videos. Please share and like if you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much.